I remember the exact time because I checked my phone twice, once out of habit and the second time because something about that moment didn't feel right. It was 11:42 p.m. on a quiet Saturday, the kind of night where the world feels paused and your home feels like the safest place on earth. My parents were out of town, the house was completely mine, and I had planned the evening down to the smallest detail: a bowl of popcorn, the lights dimmed just enough, and a horror movie playing to pass the time. Everything was normal, calm, controlled, until there was a knock at the door. It wasn't loud, not urgent, just deliberate, like whoever stood outside knew I was there and was waiting for me to respond. I froze, staring at the door from across the room, trying to convince myself it was nothing. Maybe a neighbor, maybe someone at the wrong house, but something deep in my chest told me to stay still and ignore it. Yet curiosity has a way of pulling you closer to things you should walk away from. And that night, I listened to curiosity instead of instinct, and that decision changed everything that followed. Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you, and don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. At first, I didn't move, I just sat there, listening, waiting to see if the knocking would come again. And when it did, it was slightly louder, still controlled, but more intentional, like a reminder that whoever was outside hadn't left and wasn't planning to anytime soon. I slowly stood up, every step toward the door feeling heavier than it should have, my mind running through every possibility. Maybe it was a delivery, maybe someone needed help, maybe I was overthinking it. But as I got closer, I realized something that made my stomach tighten. There was no sound of footsteps, no shifting, no movement outside, just silence between the knocks. I leaned in and looked through the peephole, expecting to see someone ordinary, someone explainable, but instead I saw a girl standing there, completely still, wearing a green sash and holding a box of cookies, her hair in pigtails, her posture straight, her smile wide, almost too wide, and for a moment, everything about her looked normal, familiar even, like something you've seen 100 times before. But the longer I stared, the more something felt off in a way I couldn't immediately explain. She didn't blink, not once, not even when I shifted slightly behind the door, and her eyes were fixed directly at the peephole, as if she knew I was watching her, as if she could see me through it, which didn't make any sense, and yet I couldn't shake the feeling that she was aware of every movement I made. I stepped back instinctively, my heart beginning to beat faster, telling myself I was just being paranoid, that this was a kid, probably part of a fundraiser, maybe going door to door late with a parent nearby. But when I looked again, nothing had changed. She was in the exact same position, same smile, same stillness, like time hadn't moved for her at all. That's when she knocked again, and this time, it was softer, almost gentle, followed by a voice that came through the door clearer than it should have. "Hi. Would you like to buy some cookies?" Her tone was polite, but flat, like it had been practiced too many times, like it didn't belong to the expression on her face, and without fully thinking it through, I reached for the handle. The moment I opened the door, the air felt different, heavier somehow, like stepping into a space that didn't belong to you. And up close, she looked even more unsettling, her makeup slightly uneven, her skin pale under the porch light, and that smile, still stretched across her face, not changing, not reacting, just there, fixed in place. She held up the box slowly, her movements controlled, almost mechanical, and said, $5 a box, maintaining eye contact the entire time, not glancing away, not even for a second. I tried to act normal, to match the situation with a reasonable response, asking how many she had left, where her parents were, simple questions that should have led to simple answers. But instead, she tilted her head slightly and said my name, clearly, calmly, like she had known me for years, and in that instant, something inside me dropped, because I hadn't told her my name, and there was no reason for her to know it, none at all. And yet she said it with certainty, like it belonged in that moment. I laughed it off, or at least I tried to, telling myself there had to be an explanation. Maybe she had seen mail, maybe she guessed, maybe it was coincidence, but deep down, I knew that wasn't it, and the longer I stood there, the harder it became to ignore the feeling that something was very wrong. I handed her the money quickly, taking the box from her just to end the interaction, hoping she would leave, hoping that closing the door would bring everything back to normal. But as I started to pull it shut, she leaned forward slightly and said, "You shouldn't be alone tonight," her voice barely above a whisper, yet somehow louder than anything else I had heard all evening. I paused, confused, asking what she meant, but she didn't answer. She just smiled again, stepped back, and stood there, watching me, not turning, not walking away, just watching, and for reasons I still can't fully explain, I closed the door and locked it immediately, my hands shaking as I stepped away, trying to process what had just happened while telling myself it was nothing more than a strange encounter, something I would laugh about later, something I could forget. But when I checked the peephole again a few seconds later, she was still there, in the exact same spot, same posture, same smile. And that's when I realized that whatever this was, it wasn't over, not even close. This is the true story of a 15-year-old boy home alone when a fake Girl Scout changed his life forever. And even now, years later, there are parts of that night that still don't fully make sense. Moments that replay in my head with questions I can't answer no matter how many times I go over them. Who was the smiling girl at the door? And how did she know my name before I ever said a word to her? Why did she stand there for so long without moving, without blinking, like she wasn't waiting for permission but for something else entirely? And how did something as simple and harmless as a cookie sale lead to me waking up in the back of a white van, bleeding, confused, and realizing too late that I had walked straight into something I should have never trusted? The more I try to explain it, the less it feels like coincidence, and the more it feels like everything that happened that night was planned long before I ever heard that first knock. What still haunts me the most isn't just what she did, but how easily I ignored every warning sign, every instinct telling me to stop, to stay inside, to not open that door. Would trusting my gut have saved me? Or was it already too late the moment she showed up on my porch with that smile that never changed? The answers are darker than anything I could have imagined back then. And the final part of this story is something I still struggle to talk about. Because even now, it leaves me with a feeling I can't shake, something that stays with you long after the moment is over, something that still gives me chills every single time I tell it. That night had started out the way most normal Saturday nights do when you're 15 and finally get a little freedom to yourself. Nothing special, nothing unusual, just a quiet house, and the kind of excitement that comes from knowing no one is going to interrupt you or tell you to turn the volume down. My parents had gone to visit my grandma for the evening, something they'd planned earlier in the week, and for the first time in a long while, I had the entire place to myself, no background noise, no check-ins, no one asking what I was watching. I remember feeling proud in a small way, like I could handle being alone, like I was older than I actually was, and I leaned into that feeling by doing exactly what I knew my mom would normally question. I made a huge bowl of popcorn, dimmed the lights, and put on The Conjuring, telling myself I'd finally watch it properly without anyone worrying about how it might affect me. It felt like one of those simple moments you don't think twice about, the kind that blends into every other normal memory. And if you had asked me then what the worst thing that could happen was, I probably would have laughed and said nothing, because in my mind, real life didn't work like the movies, and the fear stayed on the screen where it belonged. I remember glancing around the living room at one point, just taking it all in, the quiet, the comfort, the familiar layout of everything I had known for years, the family photos on the wall, the soft hum of the house settling into the night, and I felt completely at ease, like there was no reason for anything to go wrong. Earlier that day, my dad had surprised me with a pair of brand new Jordans, something I had been talking about for weeks, and they were still sitting by the doorway, untouched, almost like a reminder of how normal everything was supposed to be, how ordinary the day had been up until that point. I was just a regular kid, doing regular things, maybe a little too confident from all the horror movies I had seen, thinking I understood how those situations worked, thinking I would recognize danger if it ever showed up in front of me. But the truth is, nothing prepares you for the moment when something actually does. I had always believed that if anything strange ever happened, I would trust my instincts, I would keep the door closed, I would stay safe. But standing there that night, I didn't feel like I was in danger, not yet, because everything still looked normal on the surface. That's the part that stays with me the most, how easy it was to ignore the small details, the things that didn't quite add up, but didn't seem important enough to act on. The way I convinced myself that there was always a reasonable explanation for everything, even when something deep down told me otherwise. I had seen enough movies to know that strangers at the door, especially late at night, weren't something to take lightly. But this wasn't a movie. This was my house, my neighborhood, a place where things like that didn't happen, or at least that's what I told myself. And when I looked through that peephole and saw her standing there, smiling, holding that box of cookies like it was the most normal thing in the world, I let that image override every warning sign I should have listened to, because she didn't look threatening. She didn't look dangerous. She looked like someone who didn't belong in a story like this at all. I told myself I was overthinking it, that I was letting the movie get to me, that there was no reason to feel uneasy. And for a moment, I actually believed that. But looking back now, I can see how everything was already shifting in ways I didn't understand at the time, how the quiet felt just a little too quiet, how the air in the house seemed heavier after that first knock, how every decision I made after that point carried more weight than I realized. I can still picture the exact moment I paused, standing halfway between the couch and the door, debating whether to ignore it or check, telling myself it would only take a second, that I would just look and then go back to what I was doing, that nothing about this was worth worrying over. And maybe if I had stayed where I was, if I had let that knock fade into the background, things would have been different. Maybe the rest of that night wouldn't have unfolded the way it did, but I didn't stay where I was. I moved closer, step by step, until I was right in front of the door, close enough to hear my own breathing, close enough to feel the tension building without fully understanding why. And then came the knock. The knock echoed through the house again, louder this time, pulling me fully away from the movie and into something that felt far more real than anything on the screen. And I remember standing there for a second, staring at the door, trying to decide if I should ignore it or just check and get it over with, telling myself it would probably be nothing, someone at the wrong address, maybe even a neighbor. But when it came a third time, steady and patient, I finally moved closer, each step slower. Then the last, until I leaned in and looked through the peephole again. She was still there, exactly where I had seen her before, a girl with pigtails and a green sash, holding a box of cookies up at chest level, her smile wide and fixed, her eyes locked directly onto the door like she knew I was about to look. And for a moment, everything felt strangely quiet, like the rest of the world had faded out just so this moment could happen. I watched her for a few seconds longer than I should have, noticing the small details that didn't quite sit right. The way her makeup looked slightly uneven under the porch light. The way her expression didn't shift at all, like it had been set in place, and the way her eyes didn't seem to match the friendliness of her smile. But even with all of that, I still reached for the handle. When I opened the door, she didn't step back the way most people would. She stayed right where she was, maintaining that same distance, that same posture, and lifted the box a little higher as if to make her purpose clear. "Hi, we're raising money for the troops," she said, her voice calm, almost rehearsed, and I nodded slowly, trying to match the normal tone of the interaction even though something inside me was already starting to feel uneasy. I asked a couple of questions without really thinking about them, just trying to fill the silence, and she answered briefly, never breaking eye contact, never letting that smile drop. And then, out of nowhere, she tilted her head slightly and said, "You're cute. You know that?" The comment caught me off guard, enough to make me hesitate, enough to make me feel something I wasn't expecting in that moment, and for a split second, it distracted me from everything else that had felt off up until then. That was the moment where everything could have gone differently, because even as I stood there, part of me was telling me to close the door, to end the conversation, to listen to that quiet warning in the back of my mind that something wasn't right. But another part of me, the part that wanted to believe this was normal, the part that didn't want to seem rude or overreact, pushed those thoughts aside. I told myself I was overthinking it, that this was just a girl selling cookies, that there was nothing dangerous about it, and I ignored the way my chest felt tight, the way my instincts were trying to pull me back. She shifted slightly then, lowering the box and glancing over her shoulder toward the street. And that's when she said, "I've got more varieties in my van if you want to pick your favorite." I followed her gaze without thinking, and that's when I noticed the white van parked at the curb, something I hadn't paid attention to before, its surface plain, no windows on the side, the engine quietly running like it had been waiting there for a while. There was a pause, a moment where I could have said no, where I could have stepped back inside and locked the door, but instead, I nodded, telling myself it was just a quick look, Just a few steps, nothing serious, nothing worth worrying about. As I walked toward the van, each step felt heavier than the last, like something inside me was trying to slow me down, but I kept going, telling myself it was fine, that I was being ridiculous, that this was just a normal interaction, that I was turning into something bigger than it was. She walked slightly ahead of me, not looking back, her pace steady, almost too steady, and when she reached the side of the van, she stopped and looked at me again, that same smile still in place. The door slid open so fast it didn't feel real. 1 second it was closed, the next it was wide open, and before I could even process what was happening, hands shot out from the darkness inside, grabbing me, pulling me forward with a force I wasn't prepared for. I tried to step back, tried to shout, but a hand clamped over my mouth instantly, cutting off any sound before it could escape, and in the same motion, I was yanked inside, my body hitting the hard floor as the door slammed shut behind me. Everything happened at once, voices overlapping, movement all around me, the van jerking forward as it started to drive, and I remember the panic hitting me in waves, sharp and overwhelming, as I struggled against the grip holding me down, trying to make sense of what was happening while knowing, deep down, that I had made a mistake I couldn't undo. They moved quickly, rough hands going through my pockets, pulling out my phone, my wallet, anything they could grab, and when I tried to resist, when I tried to push back, the first hit came without warning, straight into my stomach, knocking the air out of me completely. I folded instantly, gasping, trying to breathe, but it didn't stop there. Another hit to my face, then my ribs, each one harder than the last, each one making it harder to think, harder to react. And through it all, I could hear them laughing, like this was something they had done before, something they were comfortable with. My new Jordans were ripped off my feet, tossed aside without a second thought, and at some point, I felt a sharp, burning pain against my arm that made me jolt. A cigarette pressed into my skin while someone held me down, making sure I couldn't move, couldn't escape, couldn't do anything but endure it. The pain blurred everything together, turning seconds into something longer, something harder to measure, and I realized quickly that they weren't trying to knock me out. They weren't trying to end it quickly, they were taking their time, dragging it out in a way that made it feel endless. I could taste blood, feel it on my face, hear my own breathing turning uneven as I tried to stay conscious, tried to keep track of where I was, what was happening, but it was slipping away from me piece by piece. The van kept moving, the sound of the engine constant in the background, the motion making it harder to focus, harder to think clearly, and as I lay there, barely able to move, one thought pushed through everything else, louder than the pain, louder than the fear, louder than anything I had ever felt before. As the van kept driving, I thought this was how it ends. The van slowed down just enough for the side door to slide open again, and before I could even react, before I could fully process what was happening, I was shoved out onto the street with a force that sent me crashing onto the pavement, my body hitting hard, the impact knocking what little air I had left out of me. I remember the rough texture of the ground against my skin, the sharp sting in my side, and the overwhelming disorientation as I tried to push myself up. But before I could move more than a few inches, one of them leaned out just enough to speak, his voice low and controlled. "Stay down. Don't look up. And if you go to the cops, we know where you live." The door slammed shut immediately after, and within seconds, the van was gone, the sound of the engine fading into the distance, leaving me there alone in the dark, barely able to move, barely able to think, trying to understand how everything had gone so wrong so quickly. For a while, I didn't move at all. I just stayed there, exactly as they told me, my body trembling, my breathing uneven, my mind racing through everything that had just happened, every moment replaying in fragments that didn't quite connect yet, and the fear they left me with settled in deeper than the physical pain. When I finally did try to move, it wasn't graceful or quick, it was slow, painful, every motion reminding me of where I had been hit, where I had been burned, where I had been held down, and I realized quickly that standing wasn't going to happen right away, so I crawled, inch by inch, using whatever strength I had left to get myself off the road, and toward the direction I thought led back home. I don't know how long it took. Time didn't feel real in that moment. Everything was reduced to small, painful movements and the constant awareness that I was alone, completely alone,
in a way that felt different from earlier that night, heavier, more dangerous. When I finally made it back to my house, getting inside felt like the only thing that mattered, locking the door, shutting everything out, creating some kind of barrier between me and what had just happened. But even then, even inside, nothing felt safe anymore. I caught a glimpse of myself in the mirror at one point, and it didn't feel like I was looking at the same person who had been sitting on the couch just hours earlier. There was blood, swelling, bruises already forming, and the burn on my arm stood out the most, sharp and undeniable, something that would stay long after everything else faded. I didn't call the police that night, and even now, that's something people question when they hear this story, but in that moment, their words stayed with me more than anything else. The certainty in the way they said they knew where I lived, the way it didn't sound like a threat they were hoping would scare me, but something they already understood as fact. I sat there for hours, replaying everything, trying to piece it together, trying to decide what to do. But fear has a way of narrowing your choices until doing nothing feels like the only option. It wasn't until later, much later, that I started to think about what would have happened if I had called, what they might have found, or more accurately, what they wouldn't have found: a white van with no plates, no clear markings, no easy way to trace it. A group of people who knew exactly how to approach, how to lure, how to disappear without leaving anything behind. When I eventually did speak about it, when pieces of the story started to come together, it became clear that I wasn't the only one who had experienced something like this. There were other reports, other stories, different details, but the same pattern: someone alone, someone approached, something that seemed harmless at first, and then everything shifting in an instant. The idea of using a Girl Scout disguise, something so familiar, something people associate with trust and innocence, wasn't random. It was calculated, chosen because it lowered defenses, because it made people hesitate before saying no, before closing the door. And the more I thought about it, the harder it became to believe that I had just been in the wrong place at the wrong time. That question stayed with me longer than anything else, whether this was random or if it had been planned in a way I didn't understand, whether they had been watching the house, waiting for the right moment, waiting for me to be alone. And the more I went over it, the more details started to stand out, small things I hadn't noticed at the time, things that didn't seem important until I looked back at them with everything that followed in mind. It wasn't just what happened in the van, it was everything leading up to it, every step, every decision, every moment that felt normal until it wasn't. But the biggest shock came when I finally realized who she really was. It didn't happen all at once. It wasn't some dramatic reveal in the moment. It came later, piece by piece, as I forced myself to go back through everything I had seen, everything I had ignored, every detail that didn't feel right, but that I had pushed aside because it was easier to believe everything was normal. At first, all I could remember clearly was her face at the door, the pigtails, the green sash, the box of cookies held up like a shield of innocence, and that smile, the one that never changed no matter what I said or did. But the more I thought about it, the more those details started to fall apart, the more I realized that what I had seen wasn't what I thought it was. The proportions were slightly off. The way she carried herself wasn't like a kid going door to door. It was too controlled, too steady, like someone playing a role they had practiced before. And then it hit me, not as a sudden shock, but as a slow, sinking understanding that made everything feel heavier. That girl wasn't a girl at all. She was older, much older than I had allowed myself to believe in that moment. And once I saw it, once my mind adjusted to that reality, I couldn't unsee it. The pigtails, the outfit, the entire look was a disguise, something designed to lower my guard, to make me hesitate just long enough to let her get close. And it worked exactly the way it was supposed to. I started replaying her voice in my head, the way it sounded slightly off, like it didn't fully match the image she was presenting, the way her words felt rehearsed rather than natural, and even the compliment she gave me, something that had caught me off guard at the time, now felt like part of a script, a calculated move to distract me, to make me second-guess my instincts. And then there was the van. The way she led me toward it without hesitation, without checking if I was following, like she already knew I would. What stayed with me the most, though, wasn't just what she did to get me there. It was what happened after, the way she changed once I was inside. The way that smile disappeared the moment the door closed, replaced by something colder, something completely different from the person she had pretended to be just minutes earlier. I remember seeing her again through the blur of everything happening, standing there without the same posture, without the same expression, holding a cigarette casually like this was just another night, another routine, watching everything unfold without any urgency, without any hesitation, like none of it was new to her. There was no trace of the harmless image she had presented at the door, no sign of the person I thought I had let into that moment, just someone who knew exactly what they were doing and had done it before. That was the point where everything became clear in a way that was impossible to ignore. This wasn't random. It wasn't a misunderstanding. It was planned down to the smallest detail. The outfit, the timing, the approach, all of it designed to target someone like me, someone alone, someone young enough to hesitate, someone who would try to be polite instead of cautious. The cookies weren't real. The story about raising money wasn't real. Even the way she spoke, the way she smiled, it was all part of something much bigger than I had understood at the time. I had walked into it step by step, ignoring every warning sign, every feeling telling me to stop, convincing myself that nothing bad could happen because everything looked normal on the surface. And as that realization settled in, as the weight of it became impossible to push away, it hit me harder than anything that had happened physically that night, because it wasn't just about what they did to me. It was about how easily it could have been avoided, how every part of me had tried to tell me something was wrong, and I had chosen not to listen. I remember lying there, barely able to move, the pain still fresh, the sound of their voices still echoing in my head, and feeling something break in a way I hadn't experienced before, not just fear, but the understanding that I had been manipulated from the very beginning, that I had been led exactly where they wanted me to go without realizing it until it was too late. And in that moment, there was nothing left to hold on to except that realization, the quiet, overwhelming truth that I had walked straight into a trap that had been set long before I ever opened that door. I made it home that night, somehow, against everything that should have stopped me, and on the surface, that's where the story is supposed to end, the part where people expect things to return to normal, where survival is enough to close the chapter and move on. But it didn't end there, not really. Because even though the cuts healed and the bruises faded, even though the burn on my arm became just another mark I learned to live with, something else stayed with me in a way I wasn't prepared for. For weeks, I couldn't sit in that same living room without thinking about the knock. Without replaying the moment I stood up and walked toward the door, convincing myself it was nothing. Nights felt different after that, quieter in a way that didn't feel peaceful anymore. Every small sound carrying weight. Every unexpected noise pulling my attention back to that moment. I started checking the locks more than once, sometimes 3 or 4 times before I could even try to sleep. And even then, sleep didn't come easily, because every time I closed my eyes, I saw her standing there again, pigtails, green sash, that same smile that hadn't changed even when everything else did. The police were eventually told, but by then, there was nothing concrete to go on, no clear description that led anywhere. No plate number, no faces that could be identified with certainty, just fragments of a night that moved too fast and left too little behind. The white van could have been anywhere, anyone, and the people inside it knew exactly how to stay ahead of anything that might have traced them back. There were other stories, similar patterns, enough to suggest that this wasn't isolated, but not enough to bring anyone to justice. And that uncertainty became its own kind of weight. The idea that they were still out there somewhere, that the same method could be used again, that someone else could open their door the same way I did without realizing what was waiting on the other side. What stayed with me the most wasn't just what they took or what they did. It was how easily it all happened, how something so ordinary could turn into something I never saw coming. The disguise was simple, almost too simple, and that's why it worked, because it didn't look like a threat. It looked like something familiar, something you don't question, something you trust without thinking twice. That's the part that took the longest to accept, that the danger wasn't obvious. It didn't announce itself. It didn't look the way I thought it would. It came in the form of a girl at the door, holding a box of cookies and smiling like there was nothing to be afraid of. One knock, one smile, one decision that felt small in the moment but changed everything that came after. And if there's anything that night taught me, it's that the things we dismiss, the feelings we ignore, the moments we brush off as nothing, are sometimes the ones we should pay the most attention to. Because the truth is, what feels off usually is, even when you can't explain it, even when it doesn't make sense right away, and trusting that instinct isn't something you outgrow, it's something you learn to listen to before it's too late. Would you have opened that door? What would you have done differently if you were standing in that same living room, hearing that same knock, looking through that same peephole at the girl with the pigtails and the green sash holding a box of cookies like everything was normal? Would you have trusted that quiet feeling telling you something wasn't right, or would you have done exactly what I did and convinced yourself it was nothing? Just another harmless moment that didn't need a second thought. I keep asking myself that question even now, replaying every second of that night, wondering if a single different choice could have changed everything that followed. And I want to hear your answer, not just what you think you would do, but what you honestly believe you would have done in that moment. So drop it in the comments and let me know where you're watching from, because I read every single one and I want to know how people from different places see a story like this. If this stayed with you, if it made you think twice about something as simple as answering the door, then make sure you like the video, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss another true scary story from Veiled Whispers. And if you think this was intense, just wait until the next one, because next week, I'm sharing a Home Alone story that goes even further than this. One that didn't end with someone making it back inside safely, and it's something I've never told in full until now.